The Doctor of Finance is back with me again today. We're talking about a few things and points about the council retreat. You're going to want to hear this. I'm Bunker Bob. This is the Bunker Bob Show. Well, that's right. I don't think you got enough of the Doctor of Finance earlier this week. And yes, we're continuing some of our discussion on the board retreat, or excuse me, the council retreat. I work with nonprofit organizations. I'm always saying board, so it's a habit. But it is good to have Scott Turnbull, the former mayor pro tem, and the guy that I call the Doctor of Finance, with me again today. And Scott, you attended the so-called council retreat, right? And this is something that this was very important for citizens to be a part of and to see, but they made it as hard as possible for anyone to know what really went on. They didn't record it. They didn't, and not even audio recorded it. And even those who did attend, they had to sit literally behind the council, as the U-shaped table was facing away from the people. So you were looking at the back of people's heads. But there were a couple of points that came out of that, and let's talk about them. Where do you want to start, with the PID?
Yeah, but before we start that, I do want to say I was part of the standing room only crowd.
You mean the only standing in the crowd?
Yeah, pretty much.
Because you were it. It was. I heard there's only one.
There was one other person.
Okay.
So
yeah,
we had one on each side of the aisle.
Good gracious. Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Well, in our previous shows, we talked about the retreat, and we said we'd come back and hit some highlights on it because it was a all-day event.
Right. And shame on those of you and the former council members that didn't take your day off.
Yes.
And go to that. What's the matter with you?
And of course, all the citizens should have taken the day off from work and gone too.
Absolutely. I mean, do you not care? What's the problem with you folks?
Why would we expect the city to use the $6,000 worth of software and hardware that they spent to live stream meetings so that citizens that they were worried about having to miss soccer games,
yeah,
and family events, if that's the reason it was purchased, so people could watch from home or watch later, and you schedule an 8-hour meeting on a work day,
yeah,
and you're open and transparent, but you don't stream it, you don't record it, the minutes are the bare minimum required by open meetings requirements, and that's it.
That's right.
It's a joke. I used a different term in our last meeting,
and I got in trouble, by the way.
You got in trouble for the picture, not
I
for
did.
my phrase.
I got in trouble for the posting picture. My wife, I would just say, was not amused in the least bit, and so I'll just tell you, I won't be doing that again. I learned my lesson.
The thing about the PID, in the last year, we had some issues with non-maintained roads. I won't say under-maintained. They aren't maintained.
And just for sake of reference, the only PID that exists in the city of McLennan Chisholm is for the development of Sonoma Verde, and the PID is a public improvement district that basically provides the infrastructure for a developer to put the infrastructure in. The city basically becomes the owner of all of the infrastructure at some point, and those who live in the development will then pay a fee those monies will go into this PID fund, so that when a road break goes down, or septic system or whatever, or sewer system, whatever breaks down, the money is supposed to be there, and only those who live in the PID pay for it. Go ahead.
You're correct on that, but my point was the socialists on the council last year who were wanting to use everybody's money to help a few people Their hope was of doing what's known as a maintenance pit, which Dallas does it all the time. They go into a blighted area, and if you get 50% of the landowners or property owners to agree, they assess a PID, they improve the area, and then everybody in that PID pays for those improvements. Well, they were hoping to be able to do this, and it made sense because you could go in, you could resurface the roads, you could assess the people in the PID, and they would have to pay their assessment, and the money would come back to the city. Sounds good, right? Well, the new administrator from P3 informed them that there's one little issue with a maintenance PID. The property existed before the PID was developed. Why is that important? Anybody that owns a house has a homestead right. If the house is there before the PID, you can't foreclose on the house.
If they don't pay for the PID, if they don't pay
their
payment
assessment. And the reason that these areas have fallen in disrepair, or at least what was told to us, is that nobody wants to pay their HOA dues to maintain the roads, that they're on fixed incomes, that they just don't have the money. And I'm not saying that part isn't true, that they don't have the money and that they're on fixed income. But what happened was when she said, hey guys, you can't foreclose, you could just see the chest fall on these guys who were going, we're going to get our base happy.
Yeah.
We're going to buy votes.
Yeah.
And,
can't do it.
Well, if somebody doesn't pay, we have to wait until their house sells to collect because we can't put them into foreclosure.
Wow.
Now, this is the difference between a maintenance PID and the PID in Sonoma Verde, because Sonoma Verde, there was no house there. Nobody owned anything when the PID was set up.
Correct.
So they come in front of the home or the homestead portion of it. So in Sonoma Verde, if you decide, well, I'll pay my taxes, but this PID is just stupid, I'm not going to pay for it, you'll end up on the courthouse steps with the sheriff selling your house.
You know who came up with that idea first, or who I heard it from first?
Which, the maintenance PID?
The maintenance PID. The PID was when I was first on city council, and Mike Donegan, the former mayor of McLennan Chisholm, who gave us Sonoma Verde, fast-tracked that development forward. He said that he thinks we should do more PIDs and little neighborhoods like his, where people don't want to contribute to paying for the road. They can do that. So it's not surprising that the PID was a topic of conversation and looked at by the council, by those leftists, and I call them leftists on the council, like Donegan, because that's probably where they got the idea.
Well, I don't know where it came up from. I know that this was brought up on as a possible solution during council meetings last year, and on the surface it seemed fine, made sense, but nobody had found that nuanced little detail there that says you can't force them to make the payment. Okay. We were all looking at it as if it was going to be the same as Sonoma Verde, where we could.
Right.
So
that
unfortunately, these guys now are very disappointed because just like Bernie and Elizabeth, who wants to pay everything
Pocahontas
for everybody, with your money, not theirs, your money.
Right.
They were hoping to make voters happy with your money, and they got shot out of the saddle.
Yeah.
So that was a good thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that was made clear during the PID discussion was there is a maintenance portion of the PID assessment. It continues forever. You pay off your assessment, which is a fixed amount for your lot And but as long as the development is in effect, there will be a maintenance portion collected against you for the sole purpose of maintaining the infrastructure.
Right, which is what I talked about earlier. That was the portion that I was...
Right. So currently we have $97,000 roughly in that to repair $11 million worth of infrastructure. So it's currently at $62 a year. I tried to raise it last year to 65, was told that we had to have public hearings, that we needed to have a engineering study done to determine how long the roads were going to last and whether this money was going to build fast enough to repair them. And it went nowhere, except everybody on the council said, I'm not voting for an extra tax on Sonoma Verde. Well, it's not an extra tax on Sonoma Verde. It's the same as those of us who live in HOA that have to maintain our roads. If we need an assessment to build a reserve fund, we don't get to say, well, gee, let's see if we can pass this off on the rest of the citizens of McClendon Chisholm. We have to do the assessment and we have to fork over the money.
Yeah, because if something does break, the city is obligated to pay for it, but then the city will then place an assessment on each one of the homes that's within that phase of development, and those homeowners will then be required on their next tax bill to pay the entire amount of whatever that assessment or whatever that cost was. So you have to pay the city back in 1 year. And what you're talking about is basically creating a fund so that you're paying a little along the way as opposed to a lot in one big chunk.
And the question is whether or not we're collecting
enough,
right? Building that reserve fast enough.
Yep.
And there is a question, and it wasn't addressed at this retreat, that this reserve fund is collected from everybody, and it was
everybody meaning inside
all of the people who have an assessment against them
in the pit.
Sonoma Verde residents.
Right.
They there's a question whether or not the total amount of this reserve fund can be used anywhere. You just said
you mean outside of the pit?
No, inside the pit, but in any one of the phases. You just said that, and this is what we were told, that
it applies to a certain phase.
Let's say that sinkhole developed in phase one, repair it, and then the people in phase one have to pay for that. Now the reserve fund for phase one pays for that. Okay,
is that right?
And see, there isn't a separate reserve fund. The way that it is currently being booked is there's one reserve fund, and at a previous council meeting earlier this year, it was stated that by the previous administrator that they believed that this reserve fund covered the entire subdivision.
Okay, but when we were on council, or when I was on council, there was just one phase, right? We were in phase one, but different portions of phase one.
Right.
They just started phase two. So are you saying that they're not creating a new reserve fund for phase two?
I have not seen anything on the documents that indicate that now. If they do, but as I said, the previous administrator said that this repair fund could be used anywhere because everybody's putting money into it, which for normal day-to-day repairs, I get. But if the city has to come in and bail out an area,
who's going to pay for that?
Then the phase that is responsible for it is where we were told the money would have to come from.
Yeah, those of you in Sonoma Verde, you probably want to know the answer to this.
So there's that issue. Now, Doesn't jump over to the budget, but this is tied in. Mr. Common Sense, Councilman Dahl, posted after this retreat that
goodness.
There's this problem that we have $11 million worth of assets, and by golly, they figured out that they needed to have a reserve fund set up to repair these when they break. And they were going to discuss this, and in the new budget, they were going to set aside monies. And, well, you know, if need be, that money's going to have to come out of taxes from the citizens of McClendon and Chisholm, because the roads are owned by McClendon and Chisholm.
Whoa. No. You're not talking about the PID. You're talking about something else.
No, I'm talking about fixing the $11 million worth of infrastructure in the PID using taxpayer money.
You can't do that.
Can
you do that? I mean, the whole point of the PID is so that those of us who don't live in Sonoma Verde don't have to pay for it, just like those in Sonoma Verde don't pay for the streets in my neighborhood or in your neighborhood, Kingsbridge, here at Quail Creek. They belong to us. How many of you have to maintain your own streets? You're not suggesting that that Mr. Common Sense William Dahl is suggesting he can't. I'm sorry. No. He does not. He is not. No. There's no way. I mean, I realize the guy is not running on all cylinders, but even he would not suggest that the people that we add a tax to somehow fund this PID reserve. There's no way.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? That's what he's saying.
Yes.
All right, we got to. All right, I'm gonna go and he did it on his little Facebook.
The very last part of his Facebook.
We'll get a. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared for that one. So.
We can put a link in the show to.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Show where he says this, but what he's saying is that they need to do more buckets, and this is what the accountant told him: buckets to actually earmark monies for a specific reason.
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
It makes sense. It's something that we could have done, except, hey, how long have we been collecting property tax? Since when?
Since the inception of the city.
No, they didn't start.
Oh, since that's right.
2009.
You're right. They didn't until 2009,
and the property tax at that point was solely for maintenance and operation of the city, and most of that was going to pay for the city secretary, the city administrator.
That's right.
And a couple of roads, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then City Hall came along.
Right.
And we had to spend that tax money. And since we were already taxing, let's get stupid and triple the tax rate. Actually, it was more than that.
Oh yeah, they wanted to go from 9 cents to 34 cents.
Right, and then they got reasonable and dropped it down to 18.
Yeah.
It was simply a case of we got to spend money.
Right.
We've got a tax base and we've got to spend money.
Yep.
But our budget was still very simple. You had a certain number of and types of revenue, and still up until October 1, 2018, the only large expenditure
was City Hall. The debt. Well, but you could say the fire department. Well, the fire department made up at 25% of the budget at that time. So that was a large expenditure.
But it was a single line item.
It was, yes.
It was a lump sum single line item that we did not know how the money was really being spent.
And they've still not been audited. Yes.
So, in his little recap, Mr. Dahl goes, "By golly, we're going to break this budget out, and we're going to show the expenses related to the fire department. We're going to put it in its own bucket.
Wow.
So that we have tracking for depreciated items such as bunker gear that has a 10-year life.
Yeah.
Well, of course you are.
Right.
But guess what? Up until October of 2018, we didn't have any bunker gear to track.
Right.
We didn't have any assets to track. So that's the reason it wasn't broken out in the previous budgets. And even in this year, because we signed the agreement for the fire department after the budget had to be finalized. So they're talking about doing some things that would have happened naturally, but the problem that you're not hearing is that this road maintenance that he's talking about, they're going to use that 11 million and they're going to say, hey, we got to build this reserve to repair $11 million worth of infrastructure. And, well, it's city-owned property, so the citizens need to pay for it. And he's so clueless that he doesn't realize that bucket that he wants to set up was set up in the PID. The documents say you.
I see. Okay. So he's taking the ownership of the roads literally.
That's where how he's looking at saying everybody needs to put this in here. But the real thing he's saying, my voter base is Sonoma Verde. So
yeah, that's what he's saying.
I am going to do everything I can to make it easy on them, and the rest of you all get to chip in to help.
That's
Can you say Bernie? Can you say Elizabeth?
Absolutely. He certainly doesn't care about our neighborhood. That's for sure. This is a guy who if you want to know which house William Dahl lives in, it's real easy to find. It's the one that every neighborhood has one, what you call a trash house. It's the one that the front of it you can tell the people just don't give a darn about it, and that's William Dahl's house. He has a metal shed in his backyard that the HOA has been fighting him on because he signed a document saying, hey, I promise to live this way and abide by the standards, but the rules don't apply to William Dahl. He doesn't care about that. So that's not a surprise at all, and we kind of warned you about that. We warned citizens before they voted. And so instead of, you could have had Adrian Balcom, but you get William Dahl.
Okay, now we're going to throw a little more in here on the budget. It was mentioned that the utility reserve is going down instead of up. And again, this is tied solely to Sonoma Verde. The only people using the sewer system are the citizens of Sonoma Verde. And they have a sewage rate that they have to pay. And so much of it goes to Rockwall because that's where the sewage goes to be treated. So much of it goes to Infomark for managing the system. And a portion of it goes into a reserve fund for maintenance and repair of the sewer system. So, unbeknownst to just about everybody except for Rockwall, the cost of sewage treatment has gone up. The city hasn't passed that cost through. Now, the exact number is a little hard to determine, but on the May 31st budget document, we were $19,000 under for the year in recouping our cost of sewage treatment.
$19,000 in the hole?
In the hole.
Wow.
Now, Mr. Dahl reported that as being 150% off of budget. Well, and he's right. That is exactly what the document says.
Uh-huh.
That we're 150% over. Well, over the budget, because the budget estimate was wrong.
Right.
Because, well, the estimate really wasn't wrong. Part of the problem is that
Well, they weren't billed for it.
The rate went up.
Yeah, they weren't, and the city wasn't billed for it. Am I correct?
Well,
It wasn't billed.
There's questions about that. The Iron Lady, who is fantastic on doing research, has got several documents.
That's Adrian Balkan, by the way.
I have not had time to go through all of them, sort them out, and figure out what's going on. But here's a description of why the problem is the way it is. At the end of May, there was a year-to-date balance. We got the June financials. June financials showed that there was $16,500 spent on sewage treatment. So, previous balance, year-to-date balance plus 16.5 should be the new year-to-date balance, correct?
Right.
Well, that number is approximately $137,000 for the new year-to-date. The report showed that the year-to-date is $153,000. So there is approximately $16,400 and some dollars difference. And I pointed this out to the city administrator and I said, "Can you tell me what's going on?" And she goes, "I'll get back to you." And I haven't heard. But, you know, it was kind of like, I don't get what the issue is. I'm like, well, either we're $27,000 in the hole on this, or we're $44,000 in the hole on this. And the numbers don't work. So that's the reason I said I can't tell you exactly how far in the hole we are, because there is an apparent error in the latest financials for the city on this issue.
So who would work that out?
Well, that would be between the city administrator and the city accountant.
Okay.
And the real issue is Mr. Dahl, and he's right. He was warning the citizens of Sonoma Verde, you're going to have a rate increase.
Okay.
But what he didn't say was, guys, we haven't billed you for $19,000 worth of that you should have been billed for.
All right.
And I'm going to make a prediction here. This shortage that has occurred will not be made up.
They're not going to bill the people of Sonoma Verde. What you're saying is the
what
city
I'm saying is
going to
they
use
will,
reserve funds to pay for it.
right.
That's what you're saying.
I'm saying that they are not going to go out and tell Sonoma Verde, hey, we got to add a minimum of $5 to make up for what we haven't collected, and that's if you spread the shortage over 12 months. Plus, Rockwall has said that our rates for sewage treatment will double by, I believe it's 2022, because they're laying new pipelines.
Okay.
And we get to help pay for them.
Now,
which is
my
is
question
fine.
is this. My question is this. Is this managed by the PID?
Is what managed by the
The
bid?
sewer, this whole cost, is that
No.
part of? Okay, the city actually manages the sewer cost.
Yes. See, there's something that most people don't realize. The controlling board of the PID is the city council.
Right.
So
But
everything.
as far I'm talking about the sewer. So is the sewer is not part? You're saying is the sewer is not part of the PID?
Yes, it is.
Okay. But then it's my question is this, and you got to bear with me because my understanding, you know, we brought all of these people in when I first got on city council because I had questions, and we didn't do a retreat to do it. We did it during a city council meeting, and just for the sake of reference, I was lambasted for having long meetings. That's because we didn't do the. They had an all-day city retreat, a council retreat. We didn't have all-day meetings, so we had meetings, and one of those. And what I understood about the PID, let me get to there. What I understood was that anything that is assessed on that is assessed for the PID stays in the PID. There is no way that those who are in the city would ever have to bear the burden of what happens in the PID. What you seem to be saying is that's not necessarily true, that the cities can somehow charge those of us in the city, because basically that's where the money comes from. It comes from all taxpayers, not just those in Sonoma Verde. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is your first part of your statement that everything is supposed to come from the residents is correct.
Okay.
My prediction is they're going to see this utility fund shortfall, and they're not going to...
That's their voting block.
...to raise it that way through the PID. They're going to use reserve funds to make up for it. Or even worse...
You're not talking about PID reserve funds. You're talking about city reserve funds. Am I correct?
Right. Or even worse,
yeah,
in my opinion, is they'll let this shortfall continue. In other words,
pass the buck.
They just won't make it up. The reserve in the utility fund should be at a particular level, and it will always be short this amount, because they won't go back to the citizens and say, hey,
well,
you got to make up this money that we were supposed to collect, that you were supposed to pay, and we had an oopsie, and we're not going to collect it.
Folks, you deserve the government that you elect. This is what I'm talking about. So here's what I predict, that if they do go and try to use that reserve fund, I predict that Bunker Bob and a few other citizens in McLennan Chisholm will sue the city for violating that. That is, I do not believe that they can do that.
I don't think they can either.
Yeah.
So, frankly, I think what'll end up happening is this shortfall will never be made up.
I think you're right, because
Lorna
Kippett and William Dahl, these people do not believe with their rhetoric. They absolutely don't.
But
about
Bunker,
balanced budget.
Bunker, now come on.
No, I know.
Mr. Dahl insisted
no
that he will not stand for deficit spending.
Yeah, okay.
He will not stand for deficit spending, and I'll bet you this deficit never gets made up because it's going to cost too many votes.
Yep.
In Sonoma Verde.
Those are the people who are funding him. You're absolutely right. Well,
so those were the two big things.
All right. Well, I appreciate you bringing that to us.
Reserve, or in the retreat. It's all, Sonoma Verde is pretty much the center of attention for expenses, short of the fire department. And the fire department is going to be a budgetary nightmare, solely because, and I know I was instrumental in hiring him.
Yeah, you were, but I was too.
But the guy we got doing the administrative work of the fire department,
yeah.
Well, I'm going to be gracious and say Excel is not his friend.
All right.
And for somebody who has been in this business and supposedly done budgets for years, there's some issues that just go beyond the pale.
Well, what I find fascinating about the whole fire department is all the overtime that's being paid, and that.
Well, that was built in.
I understand, but they haven't really budgeted for that. And so
they didn't budget for it, and
they have a big surprise coming because the council's not paying attention. I'm laughing because I don't want to cry. I mean, this is not funny. but you deserve the government that you elect. I keep saying that, and so that I appreciate you bringing this to us. I know that there's a lot of information, and but we've got another show coming up in just in a little bit, and it's on the General Dollar or Dollar General store, and we're gonna have a little fun with some of the clips from that. I think it's gonna be something that you won't want to miss. But the bottom line is you'll want to know what I think. You'll want to hear what Scott thinks, because we're not necessarily on the same page, and it's always good for stirring up a little dust when the two of us disagree. But
in other words, there's an Aggie who is clueless, and I'm going to try to straighten him out.
In other words, we're going to see who's right. And how many times while I was mayor, I would say, man, I hope I'm not right about this. And so many times I ended up being right, and I think I'm going to be right again, unfortunately, because frankly, this is the reality that we live in. So hope you'll stay around your computer or come back to us if you're watching it recorded. I'm Bunker Bob Steinhagen, and we will see you on the next show. Thanks for watching.